So Dana, welcome to Nova Scribes. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Brian.
How you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Super great and doing better every day. Thank you for that.
I'm
So,
mesmerized by your background.
thank
So
you. Yeah, I'll send it to you if you want. It's a lot of fun. So we were going to talk about two books. Unfortunately, I ordered your latest one and it still hasn't showed up yet. I don't know what's going on there. Supply chain challenges. Can we start with we've got to start meeting like this? Is this okay?
we can start with that one.
All
That's
right, cool.
that's baby number one.
Baby number one. All right. So what I love about this book, and we were jamming a little bit before we actually got started, but what I love about it is that this is really a resource and a reference book for everything that you need to know, I think, about really developing and designing amazing experiences. Okay. But tell me kind of where this came from. You do a little bit of a preamble with it. Love this, by the way, the worksheet on
Oh,
the start meeting model.
yeah, thank you. If you go to the website, there's actually, you can download a template like that you can use. Where that came from is I wanted to write a book about employee engagement. And I was coming back from a meeting in Chicago, and there were things that were disorganized and just seemingly more chaos than needed to be. So I opened up my computer and I started writing, and I was just jotting down thoughts. And suddenly the flight attendant said, "We're about to land in San Jose." And I looked down and I said, "Oh my God." And I'd outlined an entire book, which turned into this book. And I was meeting with a girlfriend in the business community a couple days later, and I showed it to her, and she said, "Oh my gosh, you have to write this book." And I said, "No, this isn't the book I wanted to write." So this came out of just years and years of experience of doing events and meetings, both helping with some really good ones and seeing some bad ones or missteps. And I just thought there should be a resource that's out there that helps people to really understand what it takes to have a good conference or event. So this isn't a book about meetings in-house in a company, that you go. I just talked to somebody who said she's literally scheduled from the start of her day to the end of her day, 30-minute meetings back to back, which sounded basically like how I would describe hell. So it's not for that kind of meeting, but it's more of those big events, typically that honestly graphic facilitators and graphic recorders get called in for. So we get to witness some of those. And because I was not wanting to have the spotlight shined on me, I really made this a very collaborative effort. So for anybody who's read this, I bring in as many people as I know to be part of this book, including the cover design. So for example, Emily Shepard, for those of you who know her, drew the graphic that's in the middle there. I mean, Anthony Weeks was somebody I interviewed in an airport when I was trying to talk about something that's in there. I don't remember. I just remember I did not want this to be about me. I wanted it because so many people have great resources and great practices. So I wanted it to be a collaborative effort that way.
Well, to your point, that was one of the things that surprised me when I went back and read it a second time, is that in here, you're referencing and citing the who's who of our industry. I mean, you've got, Sita Magnuson is in here, Anthony Weeks, who you mentioned before. I saw that Nevada Lane was in here. I mean, really gone through it and been very, very inclusive with these best practices.
That's what I was trying to do. And this was early on when there was a Facebook group. And so it was great fun, honestly, because Brian, I was able to go reaching out to people in Europe, people I'd never met face to face. And I said, "Hey, you have this really cool practice. I'd love to include it in my book." So it was lots of fun to be able to connect with people that I didn't actually know or hadn't met in person and include their ideas and their great practices in there.
Yeah, you can tell you had a lot of fun writing it. It seemed like that anyway.
Yeah.
And the part of that I really like about it is it's just like it's one model after another, one framework after another. I'm kind of a model geek, right? Like I collect them. Like, look, I love this thing. How engaging do you want it to be? How much do you want do you want these outcomes? It's like the measure of commitment of the participants to engagement. And I think that this is something that I can start using with my clients tomorrow, right? To say, well, really, like, where are you on this?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a model geek too, Brian. I think that's where we connected up initially.
Totally. Your card deck was an inspiration for the one that I put together too.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about this. So this is one of the things that, obviously this was pre-COVID. The conference business is booming, right? So how have you seen, and then later on in the book, you talk about how you have mixed feelings about technology. Has that changed?
Well, I think technology has become something that we have all had to absolutely embrace.
Mhm.
It was either, it was survive or die. So I think we had to embrace things like this. This platform for me is not ideal. We're all 1-inch people and you can't get to the dimensionality. We can't see everybody necessarily. Sometimes we're not fit for fit for viewing or whatever it is. And I guess that gives some flexibility. So on the flip side, we wouldn't be able to have a meetup like this if
Right.
it weren't for technology. There wouldn't be, we'd have to meet in a certain place and people from different geographies wouldn't be able to attend. So that's my love hate. And oftentimes my daughter says that I'm basically a curse to technology. Like if there's going to be a problem, I will have it.
Amazing. Well, that was one of the things that I remember. A quote later on in the book is you say, you will have technology problems, like all
Absolutely.
caps, in bold, underline. It's going to happen no matter what.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So Kimberly asked in chat what pages I was referencing. So I'll do a better job of that. So this 2x2 model, that's page 11. Okay. And then the big model, the start meeting model, that's on page 9 in Roman numerals. I remember how to do Roman numerals.
Good job.
I don't know if I got that right. It's either 9 or IX. I don't know. Tell me about this one. This one was something like I put a big star next to it. I thought this was really cool. I think,
Page.
yeah, go ahead.
Page.
Oh, I'm sorry, 29. And this one was from, let's see, who did you reference on this one?
A no feel do.
Yeah.
This is actually from a communication person that I met along the way. Actually, she worked at Mars at the time. And so when we were putting meetings, big events together, she said, what are the things you want people to walk out knowing? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do?
Mhm.
So I thought that was a really great model. I've always kept that in mind, not only for big events, but for, smaller meetings as well. Like how are people coming in? But more importantly for me, how do I want them to leave?
Mhm.
And when I'm contracting with my client, I'll often ask the same questions to get them to think kind of out of the box. They're just thinking often of actual content outcomes, but I'm thinking more about what do you want people to actually do as a result of this? And the big touchy feely one for people that really throws them is feel. Like, what do you
Right.
mean? How do I want them to feel? Well, do you want them to be excited? Do you want them to be anxious and scared? Because sometimes that is the emotion you want them to have some urgency around what we need to do.
Yeah. So earlier in the book, you talk about my word, but more like how some people treat conferences and events like this, like really boondoggles, just as a chance to, move. I think the way you said it, Arizona in winter, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Many meetings in February in Arizona.
So how do you, that to me, that sounds like going back to the commitment. That might be high engagement, but it would be low commitment, right? It's like we don't really have to get anything done. We're not making any big decisions here, right?
Right. Exactly.
Well, so how do you try to shift that with your clients, or do you get a feel for it to inform your design?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I think people are more aware since COVID about the cost of what these meetings entail. And so I think because of that, when they are bringing people together, I think that's been one of the upsides of COVID is that people really see that time as precious time. And it's a big commitment from companies and from individuals to gather together in person, not as much from a health standpoint as we evolve, but more as, this really does cost something. This is flights, this is actual time, this is hotels, and all of those costs, if you've flown or traveled anywhere, have really skyrocketed. So people are really giving a lot of thought about what they're doing and more around this model. Like, what do we want people to know and to do and to feel coming out of these events?
Yeah, it's an investment for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about the rules already.
Yeah.
And again, I loved how this is almost like a source book for all of these other really, really great resources. And I love that you brought in Janine Underhill's questions that she asks during the design phase.
Yes. Yes.
How did you go about, were these all people that you knew or people that you came in contact with? What was your research process like for this?
Well, I wouldn't say it was technically research, that's for sure.
Okay.
But I would say, yeah, it starts with, the people that are in my inner circle that I've interacted with for basically all of my career in doing this work. And then it expanded out. So as I said, I used Facebook as a resource at the time. Remember, this book was published in 2013. So this really was early days for IFVP and for graphic facilitators to get online and see that there were other people out there doing this work.
Mhm.
It was before I met you, Brian.
It was, but not too well. You said when was it?
2013. So I met you in 15.
15, right? Did you make it to IFEP 2012? Because that was my first one. I don't know.
Where was it?
That was Pittsburgh.
I didn't make Pittsburgh.
Oh,
No.
Pittsburgh was awesome. Yeah, that was great.
That's what everybody says about all the ones I didn't go to.
I wonder if there's a trend there. So this was one I read this one like 3 or 4 times and I didn't quite get it, right? So I'm hoping you can help me out with it. So the 4-drive model, let me zoom in.
Okay.
Yeah, Lawrence and Noria's 4-drive model: acquire, bond, learn, and defend. Can you tell me about that one?
Sheesh, that one's a tough one. Let me see. I have to go back and read it a little bit.
I think it had to do with like motivators, right?
Oh, and it's about gaming and gamifying things.
Okay.
So that's the context that you really have to understand it. So it's understanding that when people gamify, so gamification, again, that was a new thing in 2013 and
Right.
helping people learn. So there were these 4 things. These are the things that people really want when they're gamifying, or it's a way to think about gamifying. Is people want to acquire things. So they either want actual physical things, or they want to have status or power. So if you think about fantasy football, that's more of a status and power things. That's an acquisition. And actually fantasy football is a great activity to think about against this model. So they also, in fantasy football, I don't do this, by the way, my husband's addicted to it. It's not my thing. I was actually at a meeting I swear to you, in the stadium of the Baltimore Ravens in the year 2000. It was right after they had won the Super Bowl. And a guy came in, he talked about this wacky thing that was going to take over sports called fantasy football. And I'm scribing and I'm rolling my eyes going, this is never going to catch on. So don't look at me for stock picks. So again, learning. So sometimes there's an opportunity to learn from gamification. So sometimes people are using gamification in their training activities. So it's a way to teach them new skills. And then defend. So sometimes it's like my team against your team. And so there's defending what I have and protecting that. So that's where that model comes from.
Do you see these dynamics happen in group processes in facilitation?
I don't know, not as much.
Okay.
I think this is definitely much more applicable to conferences and events. So a lot of times when you hear about like big conferences, as they come up with outside activities that they're trying to get people to bond and form allegiances with each other, they'll do things like when you come into an event, they'll set up like some sort of game board or something where you're doing a scavenger hunt or something. Right. So I don't think about that so much with the meetings that I'm facilitating because I'm a little more down to business and I don't have as many people.
Happy to hear that. I'll tell you, before we move off of this page, there was this one thing that like it tripped me that 1% of human beings are killers. Bartle test, gamer psychology. I was like, 1%, because like I know 100 people, so one of them's got to be, so it was. Can you tell me a little bit more about that one? Explorers, killers, achievers, socializers.
I mean, that comes straight out of whatever I've quoted there, the Bartle test of gamer psychology. So I'm literally just quoting what I learned out of that.
Yeah, that one was pretty wild.
It's funny for me, Brian, because I'm actually not a gamer at all. I mean, the last video game I played was Pong. So wow. This is a whole world that I really don't relate to. So writing about it is really different from anything that I personally ascribe to, but I watch it in events and I see how people really, really catch on to it and really latch into the ideas.
Well, let's talk about that, because one of the things that you include in the book is a lot of what I might call icebreakers or energizers, right? Things that like loosen people up and get them. So what's the difference then between a game for the purpose of enjoyment and diversion versus an energizer or an icebreaker?
I think For me personally, when I think about games in the way that I would use them would be something like an interactive bingo game, where you're going around getting people to sign off on things that they happen to know about, or I did this at my own wedding where we had a bingo card and people went around and signed like, who knows, where Wade and Dana are taking their honeymoon or something like this. It was just silly and fun, but it was a way for people who obviously came from, I'm very aware in meetings, as in wedding receptions, people don't necessarily know each other.
Mhm.
They have one common sort of spoke point, but they don't know each other. And so creating some sort of way to break that, as opposed to an icebreaker where you're asking, the latest one I've seen that I think is really clever. Anyone who knows me knows that I always blank.
Oh,
And
that's
so
a great one.
it's a really fun one, right? Because you reveal something about yourself that is obviously something that if people knew you, they know. Like anybody who knows me knows that I always talk about cheese.
Is that true in your case?
So yeah, I'm Dana con queso to my friends.
Wow. Sorry, my dog hates the Amazon delivery guy. Let me fix
Oh
it.
yeah, well,
Okay, super. So I want to go back a little bit. I'm on page 44, but it's not a model. It's really just a quotation about the hallway conversations, right? That's stuff that happens in between the sessions.
yes.
And later on, you talk about, for example, unconference and open space and World Cafe and those kinds of experiences that are by design. They're
Yeah.
set up to be outside of the strict flow of the event. Talk a little bit about those spaces in between, right? How do you design them? What's the value of them?
Yeah, I just actually used this quote with somebody. I said, the real meeting, people often say, happens at the bar
Mhm.
and not the coffee that we had in the meeting. So it's really creating those downtimes where people can kind of think about things and interact with people. And I think this is a really, really big, important one for me, both in my own facilitation, but in larger events and conferences, which is we often, because time is so precious, we try to schedule every minute. And I don't know about you or anybody else on the call, but like the worst words in the work dictionary are, let's have a working lunch. Like,
Yeah.
oh, and not just because I don't want to work through lunch. It's like everyone needs some downtime to kind of absorb. If you're learning a lot, you need some time to absorb it. You need some time to like catch up on other things. But this constant fire hydrant of information or conversations is not actually, more is not more. It's definitely a more is less phenomenon.
Yeah, giving people space to like synthesize it. One of the things that I get a little scared of when I'm not designing the meeting is if the client says, okay, here's our agenda, and we've got 15 minutes for this conversation, 15 minutes for that conversation, 15 minutes for that. And there's like no breathing room. There's no synthesis.
Right.
Like they're trying to cram 10 pounds of stuff into a 2-pound bag, and it's just like,
Exactly.
you're just going to stress people out with that.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah. And, it's the same thing, going from one speaker to another,
Mhm.
same thing. Like I've just finished hearing this amazing talk by Brian, and suddenly Heather's going to come on. And I haven't even had time to really wrap my head around all the brilliance that I got from Brian before Heather's going to download brilliance.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's the thinking about like just cramming information into stuff. You talk about obviously the TED Talks really influenced this book. There's a lot in there, and one of them is on the TED commandments, which I want to talk about in a second. But you also say, don't try to be the next Ken Robinson or Jill Bolte Taylor, right? And if you watch the TED Talk that I think really made Ken Robinson famous, he spends the first 75% of it just telling stories and cracking jokes and things. It's not until like the last 25% of it before he actually gets to kind of the point around education, right?
Well, and that goes back to like people take information in through stories.
Yeah.
So that's how we remember things.
So you do talk a lot about the architecture of TED Talks, and Nancy Duarte makes a big appearance in here. So how has that influenced you and the way that you think about bringing in information?
I think, I can't remember if I wrote it in this book, but again, remember 2013, TED Talks were still fairly new. I think it's the idea that, well, number one, we already knew that television was breaking down our attention span. So we were only able to concentrate for a certain amount. I don't know how much that's been affected by recording things and all of that. You can skip around and stuff now. but we used to have an attention span of what, 9 minutes or
Yeah.
something like this. It's probably even shorter. What
It's
I
gotten
love,
shorter. Yeah.
yeah, it's gotten shorter, which is kind of sad actually. But I think TED Talks really drove home and made popular the idea that talks needed to be succinct. Like you could make a point about something either significant or not significant, but you didn't need more than 15 or 20 minutes max.
Mm-hmm.
And that took out, I don't know about you, but I witnessed and had to graphically capture people doing like 60-minute, 70-minute, 90-minute talks. And it was like, really, you're not that interesting. You've boiled down to nothing. And you don't have that many good stories. So I think what the TED Talks really, that format really did is gave people a model for how you could really organize your thoughts and be more succinct and get it down into what was really relevant.
Yeah.
And frankly, what people could absorb.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of switching up the formats, one of the things that I saw in your book was the idea of getting rid of the tables, right?
Oh, yes.
By the way, this is on page 81. I'll try to do better about referencing the page numbers. Tell me about getting rid of the tables. I could see that as being really scary.
Oh, it's very scary. It's so funny. I'm literally just having that conversation with a client I'm working with right now. So we're about to do a strategic visioning session. And they said, oh, we have this conference room and it's got a big fixed table. I've been there once. And they said, oh, no, it's plenty big. It's got, there's chairs for 12. And I said, no, 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 no. And I even have a drawing that I share with clients that shows like what I want in terms of wall space. I want the chairs in a semicircle. I learned this so long ago. I can't even remember what consultant I was working with. And they took out the tables and said, you don't need them. They create a barrier between people. And it creates a safety barrier for people to hide behind, but it also creates this sort of, I don't need to put myself out there because I've got this kind of protected. It's a bizarre thing because obviously I can see the lower half of your body. And when I changed the chairs, it did two things. One, it broke down that barrier. It allowed people to share and be intimate and talk about things that were important. But also it's really interesting because when they walk into a room, so I'm not doing like, your normal meeting sessions. I'm not your weekly Monday afternoon at the meeting. So when we're doing a meeting, it's typically offsite or at a different location than they're typically meeting. Two, they walk in, there's suddenly these big, either blank wall charts or, templated wall charts. And there's a semicircle of chairs and no tables in front of them. And immediately it throws people off, but I think in a good way, because they kind of go, oh, this is going to be something different. And I think that's really good because we do so many meetings. People are involved in just this litany of meetings. To have something that kind of slaps them over the face to say, this is going to be different, I think is good. It's kind of wakes them up from kind of that brain fog.
Yeah,
that they always do.
I think that begs two questions, right? Let's do one of them at a time.
Please.
So what are the kinds of meetings that do require a facilitator? Because to your point, if you're doing that like 30-minute kind of tactical type meeting, you don't necessarily need a facilitator for that. So what would you say would be the kinds of conversations where you'd bring in an external facilitator?
Well, the big one that comes straight to mind is I just worked with a client like this. He obviously knows the content very well, but he knows the content and wants to participate in the conversation. And he recognized right away, he can't facilitate that conversation because he wants to play an active role. He wants to ask questions. And he wasn't going to be able to pull out because he had a very active, very intelligent group of people he'd brought together and was paying, by the way, to consult with him. He wanted to make sure that somebody was managing the conversation so that, not that we stayed, to a rigid agenda, but wanted to make sure that we got out of what we set out to do in the time that we had. So I think that's a time when facilitator is useful. When the leader or whoever is gathering this group together wants to participate is an important thing.
Mm-hmm. What about around the content of the meeting, the kinds of topics where you might bring in an outside facilitator?
I think topics that are tough to think about, that you need kind of a structure to think through them. Sometimes, for design thinking purposes, when you have to get out of your own way and not be thinking about how we always do it. So I facilitated a conversation like that yesterday on Zoom. Both the leader of the strategy team, as well as her role in the company, I was chatting with somebody offline about it and saying she's getting defensive. So I think a conversation like that, where somebody has some risk involved, to have a facilitator keep it neutral so that nobody feels like they're being personally attacked, is another really good time to have a facilitator, when it's, when the stakes are high or the subject is kind of hot.
Stakes are high, subject is hot. Yeah. Yeah. So to your point about having a different kind of conversation, I think a lot of like going back to the idea of getting rid of the tables and doing something that's physically off site is because you want to create a new mental model, a different container for a different kind of conversation, right?
Correct. And eliminate the day-to-day disturbances, the phones and the emails and all those things. Even though they come in on your phone, you can control them a bit if you're out of the workspace.
Yeah, a little bit more difficult to do that if you're actually on site and doing these.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I think it's the nature of a facilitator to want to be just a little bit disruptive to the way that our clients typically have conversations, because that's why they're hiring us.
Exactly.
Is that they want us to be, they want to have different kinds of conversations. If they wanted to have the same kinds of conversations, they don't need a facilitator. So here's my question, right? that envelope of comfort, it can be really flexible for some groups. It's like, you want to, we all take our shoes off. Sure. Let's do that. Right. Others is like, oh, no. We don't sit in circles. Right. But how do you discern when you're working with a client, like how much can you stretch that envelope?
Well, I think one of my jobs is to push that envelope. I think, when they say, oh, no, we don't sit in circles. Sometimes I don't ask. I just tell them that's how
we're sitting in circles. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, when they really push me, we'll put tables on the outside, because people get incredibly concerned that they have no place to put their coffee.
Right.
So we'll put the tables on the outside of the circle of chairs. And, if there's some security that comes out of having a table nearby, I don't know what it is, but that helps them to be able to, like, if they want to work on their computer before the meeting starts, and then they can just close their laptop and they know that it's safely behind them, kind of like Linus and his blanket. But the computer's nearby, there's a safe place to put coffee. That's how I'll compromise.
Okay, let's stay on this thread for a second, because I think we're touching on something that's really interesting. Because I think that sometimes when you push against that envelope too hard, right, it snaps. And the way that it snaps back at you is you get open resistance to the process. Dana, this is not getting us what we need. Right. I don't see where we're going with this. This isn't working out. So how do you deal with that resistance in the moment when it's happening?
I think Brian, it's so funny. I was coaching somebody earlier and I said, I think facilitation is about comfort in your own skill and trusting your knowledge and your experience. So I think it's something that over time you build the trust to go, I might be wrong here. And so testing that with the group and being willing to, one, ask the question and get immediate feedback in the moment, which can be scary. Two, being willing to be flexible with your process. This isn't working. What do you feel like we need to do instead?
Nice. Yeah.
So I think it's just, I really, really believe that confidence and experience are two really, really important qualities for being a good facilitator, because early on, I can promise you, I was gripping that agenda. Like, we were going to follow that agenda, God damn it.
Yeah.
And just, not feeling like I had a backup, a plan B. And now I joke and I say, if we have a 2-day agenda and we are still following the agenda to a T on day 2, I've done something wrong.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've actually seen that evolution happen with a lot of professional facilitators. Like when I started, I would come up with a 3-ring binder that thick of everything I thought people might say, right? Just so I'd be ready for it, right? Now it's like, okay, let's put it on an index card, So, and I've seen that with others, is that it's almost like they start with the classical, with the structure, right? With the planning down to the last detail. And then when they get a little bit more experience, when they know 3 chords, then they can start playing jazz.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a really great point. And you just have to trust yourself. You will learn it and you will fail on the path to learning it.
Right. Yeah, that's what it's about.
Yep.
I love these. So I'm on page 92. These are just some quick ideas, but I think they're fabulous, right? Get rid of the tables. We talked about that. Putting music into it, being aware of the power structures that are there, getting outside, like physically leaving, getting
Yes.
outside.
Yes.
Of course, using a graphic recorder, using roving recorders, and then getting people up and out of their chairs and moving around, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So as you've said a few times, it's been a while. Do you want to update this list? Is there anything else you'd add to this?
Oh, I'm sure there probably would. One of them really sticks out to me. Get outside. I was working with a group in San Diego and we were doing visioning. The room wasn't ideal. The energy was kind of dropping off. It turned out to be a beautiful sunny day. I said, what do you guys think? We'll go outside and do some visioning. I mean, I can't tell you how the energy changed. We were like dive bombing to the ground. It must have been after lunch. And it just took off. They were so happy to be out in the sunshine, not in a meeting room. We sat at like a picnic table or something doing visioning on flip chart paper. And I think they were so appreciative. They talked about it for a long time afterwards because I continued working with them at how much they appreciated the flexibility of not feeling like they had to do the process a certain way in a certain space.
Love it.
So, you know, it doesn't have to be on a big chart. If you do it on a flip chart page and it's not super pretty, it doesn't matter because really at the heart of it, facilitators are there to serve the group. And so if that serves the group, and in this case, it really did, then we got to what we wanted to, and they were happier about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. One of the ones I'm looking it up right now. I might not be able to find it, but one of my favorite techniques that's in the book that I had never heard of before and I've used a lot since then. And there's a lot of those in here. There's tons of modalities in this book, right? Energizers, icebreakers, modalities for exploring ideas, refining those ideas, planning against those ideas. One of my favorite ones was like one of the most simple, this hand tracing one,
Right.
right? I'm looking for the chart. I might not be able to find it, but I've done that like that. I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's super cool. We got to do this one.
So much fun.
Yeah. So actually, do you want to, I just mentioned it. Do you want to talk about the modality, like how you actually do it?
Yeah. I actually learned this from a consultant up in Northern California. So he would do this with every group and he was working with very, very senior teams. So you think there's no way this would work with a senior team, right? They loved it because it's, you know, they say CEOs are the last to get feedback. Well, senior teams are the last to be able to play and have fun. So that's why this one works so well for me. So what you do is you put up a big blank piece of paper, and as people come in the room, you have a bunch of colored markers on the floor scattered, and you have them trace their trace their dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you have them put that hand on the wall, trace it with their non-dominant hand, and then write what the first thing that they ever wanted to be when they grew up. So when they were talking to grandma or grandpa when they were 5 years old, and grandma said, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'd write that. And then we do a debrief after we get everybody's hands up there. First of all, you can't imagine how fun it is. You cannot have a super, super serious meeting when you've got a whole bunch of traced hands with your non-dominant hand. So it's all squiggly and stuff. And then they're writing, you know, librarian, fireman, and police officer, and all the fun things, ballerina. And when they go through that, it really kind of disarms people. So when people are feeling conflict, or, you know, you're reminding me this might be a great thing for a group I'm about to work with.
Yeah, it's a fabulous resource. I highly recommend this book. You should read it.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I think I will. I don't know if I can review it, but
well, so to that point, I mean, I got to chapter 9 because this is the part that I got to be honest with you. I fall down on this part, right? This after the thing, like when the event is done, it's like that's it, you know. And most of the time, it's like I got to get on a plane and go to the next one, right? So this, I really, really, really love these ideas because they're how do you keep the learning, the conversation, the atmosphere, the connection going after the event.
Brian, tell us what page you're on for that.
Oh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. It's 127 is where it really kicks off.
Okay, got it.
And one of my favorite ideas actually comes from Nevada Lane on this, which is the idea of like follow-up visual postcards, right? And I could see using you know, some of our charts, putting that on there and just, you know, including a note. But there's some great stuff in here that I'd never thought of before. So a graphically designed summary report, like really putting in the time and resources to do something nice beyond just like, okay, here's a PDF of all your charts. Have a nice day.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, a time-lapse video, you know, emails with references, relevant articles, that follow-up, right? So I saw you nod a little bit when I said I wasn't great at the after stuff. Have you been able to crack the code on that?
You know, I always do the meeting report because I think it, like you said, and I will fully credit the Grove. Grove has always been really good about doing meeting reports. I put them together, and I put them together having the charts in the order that they came in the meeting with some annotation at the bottom. So I actually call it almost like a story report.
Nice.
Because I can go back in a meeting report I wrote 10, 15 years ago, and I go right back to the meeting. I can remember everything that happened there because of the detail that I put in it. And so better than a white paper or some kind of like summary of a meeting that's in text format, I think the visual with a little tiny bit of context is really helpful for people to just remember like what happened.
Yeah, I agree. And Heather noted in chat that Sarah Spencer makes books for her clients. She does all sorts of stuff. In fact, she's done a few. Let me go back to the Nova Scribes. So her series of charts, Sarah Spencer's, is called The Hatchery. And if you go back, if you search for that under Nova Scribes, you'll see the recorded workshops that she's done, where she really has a process about how she takes that product that she's designed and productizes it that much more, like putting it onto coffee mugs, putting it onto mouse pads, putting it into like jigsaw puzzles and other things that, she can, for lack of a better word, really upsell the client and bring them more value for the work that we do.
Yeah. And I think the second is more important than the first, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, that it brings value to the client makes you a more worthwhile resource for them to use in the future, because they didn't just get the meeting, but they got, takeaways that actually had some value.
Right. Here's that quote that I got before. I'm on page 138. There will always be tech problems. I love that. I like to go into tech meetings, virtual meetings, with an attitude of wonder, as in I wonder what's going to break today.
I don't remember if I used the quote in here, but I used to go to Wisdom 2.0 conferences in San Francisco, and the guy who ran it, whose name is escaping me right now, he said, and I've talked about this before, he said, there's the meeting that you planned and then the meeting that happens.
Right.
And never will the two be the same.
Yeah. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. I think that was Eisenhower or somebody, one of those guys. Right. Yes. So I really wanted to talk. I mean, we could talk about the tech stuff. I really want to talk about food, because food shows up in your book. And I always, I can be a little bit like, sometimes my clients will say, you really want to control the menu? And it's like, yeah, I kind of do want to control the menu, because like, woe betide the meeting if you show up and they've got pasta and sandwiches, and like pizza and stuff like that. Because they're gonna have that carb crash in the afternoon, right? And they're just gonna be checked out. Yeah. So what is your favorite food when you're controlling the menu? What do you like to see?
I mean, I think what's shocking to me about food in meetings is how incredibly uneducated most people are about the impact of food. Really, really shocking to me. If I have control, I mean, obviously I do not arrive with pastries spread out all over the place.
Right.
No pasta, like you said. I mean, nourishing food, if you've done any sort of dietary studies of your own, whether it was for your own health or somebody else's, I mean, protein and lean carbs are the best. When they bring in the brownie thing, the cookie tray after they've just fed you this huge pasta meal, it's like, really? And people can't resist that. I mean, most people can't resist it. And there's this mentality. And for those of us who are in this field, we really have to control it, because it's like, oh, it's a special day. Well, if you're working in this field, every day is a special day.
Right.
And you're eating the not so good food every day, or certainly more than you should. So you really have to, I don't know. I mean, mini educate about, if you get input into the food, how salads would be better, how proteins like fish and chicken and things. I have seen an uptick in better foods in the meetings, at least that I've been going to recently. So maybe that goes back to that meetings as an investment or something, or people got educated. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of my mentors used to say, well, you have to take care of yourself when you travel. And that meant like going out to steak dinners and things like that. And, that got, you can do that up to a point, but then it's like, okay, if this is the life, as you said, every day is special.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we have to, in particular, if you're facilitating or just graphic recording on the wall and not having an active speaking role, I mean, you have to nourish yourself. You have to have protein, because you can't survive on carbs. I mean, I'm really pushy about that. It's like, no, I'm not going to have your pastry. I need to have eggs or something that's going to nourish me.
Right. About 99% of my clients, I think I'm lucky, are pretty gracious. They're like, would you like to have lunch with us? I
Uh-huh.
did have that one client was like, no, we're not paying you to eat. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, yeah, literally came out of that person's mouth. I haven't worked for them since
Oh
then.
my gosh.
One thing that you put in here, and I really, really, really appreciated it, was having space for both extroverts and introverts.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
this is on page 139. So as an introvert and a pretty deep introvert, right?
Mm.
I really appreciated this. So thinking about the kinds of spaces and activities that are a little bit more reflective, they don't necessarily require conversation, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that, about how you set up spaces for those two
Yeah.
different types.
I'll tell you, Brian, I'm not a raging introvert. I'm a raging extrovert.
Yeah.
So COVID kicked my butt, but I really have come to appreciate the space that introverts need. I've worked with a couple of colleagues. Heather and I both know one, and he and I worked together. Heather, Carlos, and I. And he's a raging introvert. I'm a raging extrovert. We get done with the meeting. I'm like, I wonder where they're having dinner. And he goes, I'm going to go take a bath and go to bed. I'm like, what? How can you miss the dinner? So it's been a learning curve for me over time. So this again is one of those lessons that I've learned and experience through experience. But just watching how introverts get shut down in meetings because the extroverts are like filling the air and dominating the
Right.
space. And so slowing that down for me looks like giving people time to process. So having them write things down instead of just blurting things out.
So writing
It's
things
one way
down.
to
Yeah.
do that.
Mhm.
Or creating, even for introverts, you can tell me because I'm test casing against you, but even taking a larger group discussion and breaking it into breakout groups
Mhm.
creates more space for introverts to get their voice in.
Yes,
So
I think so. I think so.
yeah. I mean, even though sometimes, the extroverts will say, oh, no, it's good for us to have this conversation all together. It's not actually, because it's not good for everyone in the
Right.
room. And without everyone participating, it's not really productive.
Yeah, it's good for them, maybe.
Right, right. It
Mhm.
works for them.
Yeah, yeah. You quoted Sam Kainer in your, or at least he was one of your resources in your
Mhm,
resource list. And
mhm,
one of the ways that he says is making space for quiet people, right?
mhm, mhm.
How do you bring some of those, quieter people in, as you said, writing things down, smaller group
Right.
sizes? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Cool.
being mindful about it, especially if you are an extrovert, you just have to be extra mindful that the way that you think and work and process doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, so that was the other thing. It didn't come out. You did talk about Kolb and a couple of the other learning people who have really thought about learning styles. You talk about the auditory, the visual, the kinesthetic, right?
Mhm.
And that's something that's such a struggle. And I don't know if did you ever meet Heidi Forbes Oeste? Does that name ring a bell?
Heidi is quoted in one of my
She's in
books.
there. Okay. So one
Yeah.
of the things that she was actually studying was it was taking the whole auditory, visual, and kinesthetic thing to the next level.
Mhm,
She was looking at, well, are there more learning styles? And she found that, yes, there were. She found that there are, guess what, doodlers. There are
mhm,
people who learn better when they're at ease. There are people that learn better when they're actually stressed.
mhm,
There are people who have to have trust in the
mhm,
person that they're learning from. So she identified about 12 of these different learning styles.
mhm.
So even if you keep it simple to visual, auditory, kinesthetic, introverted, extroverted, that's
Right,
still a lot of variation that's in there,
right,
right?
right.
So
Yep.
how do you design an experience that's going to work for all of those different learning types, all of those different preferences?
Yeah. I don't know that I think you can design it to work for all those preferences. I think what you have to do is just keep mixing up the things that you're doing
Mhm.
so that you are touching on all of those preferences.
Yeah.
That's me. You may have a different opinion in
No,
some group,
that's
but
so what I'm hearing from you is like switching up the modality. Maybe you're not going to
yes,
make everybody happy, but you'll hit somebody right with something.
exactly.
Okay,
Yes, exactly.
cool.
I think what I have learned over time is that while everybody says that there's those three learning styles, and there probably are, everybody always seems to relate to the visual. Everybody is so grateful to have stuff that's actually drawn up, and it catches some of those things that Heidi talks about. So trust,
Mhm.
a lot of times by capturing things in a live format in front of people, it helps with trust because trust has been broken down because somebody was writing on a pad in the back of a room. and didn't capture things properly, that breaks down trust. So I think that the visual element takes care of a lot of those things, even though it's not specifically visual. And it also helps, I've found, I don't know how other people have experienced it, but because the writing actually sometimes sets the pace, it helps with introverts who need a little more time to process in their head. They get to watch the writing instead of hearing somebody talk super, super fast. Do you find that?
Yes. And if I could just change one word, speaking for the 51% of the US population who are introverts, I would say that the introverts who like a little bit more time to process, right? Because when it is on the big piece of paper, you can see it, you can percolate on it, you can synthesize it, you can wrap your head around it. And it's like, okay, now I've baked my cookies and I'm ready to share them.
Right.
Yeah. And nothing, to your point earlier about building trust, I don't think anything says I've heard you as well as writing down what that person said.
Yes. And writing what they said in their words. When I teach people graphic facilitation, who are not going to go into this field, but are facilitating for the first time using a template.
Right.
I said, listen, it's this easy. You don't need to change the words. You don't need to think about how to write it. Just write what they said.
Yeah.
And they're often amazed, to my astonishment, that how easy that is, and yet how hard they had made it before. I'm just write down what they said. You don't need to translate it. You don't need to do anything more than that.
Right. Not to put any of themselves into it, not to filter it, not to edit it as it goes, just to capture the verbatim. Yeah.
Right. I remember, am I allowed to swear on this?
I mean, you could.
I'll use the S word. So I was facilitating way early on. I think I'd just taken like my first Grove class. So this is early. And I was facilitating a pretty hostile group of people, let's just say. And they said, we were talking about the work environment. And they said, this place treats us like, and I said, and so I was at the board and I wrote down exactly that. And I tell you, I am not kidding. There was a change in that room when I wrote it down, because they said, we can trust her. She's actually listening. We can trust her. She's not going to change the words. She's actually going to write what we say. And the whole energy and dynamics happened. It completely changed after that comment.
Yeah. That's gutsy, because you're recording something and it's a verbatim.
Right.
And just very quickly, I was doing something for one of the U.S. agencies, and they had a political appointee from a rather unpopular administration show up and proceed to dress these career civil servants down. You guys are the swamp. You are draining taxpayer dollars. I mean, these are guys like 20, 30-year veterans in their field, right? Incredibly loyal to their country and doing the things that they do. Well, they had this guy come in and just rip them up one side and down the other, right? Swearing.
You were supposed to record that?
I was supposed to record that. And I was like, great. What am I supposed to do now? And I decided, I said, well, you know what? He said it. So I did verbatims with it, right? Now, this guy traveled with an entourage, which included attorneys. And so his lawyers were looking at me like this, like just shaking their heads. They're turning white. I'm like, oh no, I'm writing it down, right? Because it's me and the guy up there on stage, right?
Right.
So I know that this thing is going to have a shelf life of about 30 seconds before I'm getting my big one, Montana marker, and I'm going to be redacting this thing, right? But here's what this guy does. He points to me and he says, now, you guys are going to be meeting here in this conference over the next 3 days. At the end of those 3 days, I'm going to come back and check on you. And those words better be there, right? And the lawyers are like, oh, crap.
Oh, God.
So we couldn't redact it. He had to leave it like that. So this begs a question, right? How do you decide what you're going to include in a chart versus not? Like, how much of the, do you pretty up what the people say just so it's a little bit more PC afterward? Like what do you record and what don't you record?
I don't pretty it up. I've never had a situation like that. I think the only thing I would have done is I would have put every quote in a talk bubble.
So they were. Oh yeah, they were all quotes. You're absolutely right. With quotation marks and talk bubbles and a silhouette of the guy. Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I want you to get credit, Buster. I've not actually had that happen. Honestly, I don't have time in my mind to translate it into something else that's prettier. I mean, I'll try to like, make the graphic around it look nice, but the actual words, I just capture what's being said.
Yeah, there's always a synthesis, right? We can't capture it. We're not stenographers. We don't do everything that they say. So there is I'm going to capture this. I'm not going to capture that. Right.
Right.
So how do you decide what you're going to capture versus not?
This is the age-old question for me. I feel like I couldn't train people on how to do this anymore because I just do it so intuitively. I don't even think about it. I mean, that's the question that I get at every break, right? With people who have not seen it before.
Right.
How do you know? Did you just do that live? Have you seen the PowerPoint in advance? No. I honestly, if I could give one thing that I know I do is I listen for energy, which sounds very airy-fairy, but you can hear when something has great meaning or importance.
Yeah.
At least I can. And that I know is the things that I need to capture.
Dana, I've thought about this a lot. That is the best explanation I've ever heard. Listening for energy, right? Because you can tell with like tone of voice, body language, facial expressions, when they are doing their own underscoring and emphasizing, it's like, okay, that's important.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing, and it's funny, this just came up on a Facebook post of somebody who was new getting into the field. If the presentation is disorganized and chaotic, my chart's going to reflect that. So I can't make your incredibly disorganized talk look pretty. There's just at least not the first go round. I cannot possibly clean that up in the moment because we all love let me give you 4 points and they give you 3.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the things. Okay. Here's my top 3 ideas. And you get to 2 and you're like, wait a minute, what happened? Right. Where was the third idea?
Yes.
Looks like Radhika's got a related question asking, how do you organize your space for a multi-day event? Have you ever run out of space?
Oh, sure. All the time. I mean, I try my very best. One of my big things that I do is I'll have, I'm even thinking about using this as a backup for my event where they're talking about the space being what it is and we're not going to change. I'll go get foam insulation boards, which are way cheaper than foam core boards.
Yeah.
And have those as kind of backup walls to be able to put things on, put charts on. Or, if you really are limited on space, you have to prioritize like what needs to stay out and what needs to be rolled up and, sorry, but we got to put it away. So, and there's some really clever people who have, I forget the group out of New York. They've set up at South by Southwest, for example, printers. So the minute they're done with a chart, they make a stack of prints of one of the charts that people can have as a takeaway. So that's one way to do that.
That's pretty amazing. Let's stay on the foam boards for a minute. I see some other questions, but I want to, so there's so much goodness in this that makes this book so worth it. One of them is around resources and tools. So you mentioned the foam insulation board. Tell me about this stuff, Sonique PVC board.
Oh, I'm sure somebody gave me this as a resource. Tell us what page you're on, Brian.
Oh, I'm sorry, 164.
Okay. I'm sure this was something that somebody told me about, so I included it. Because you see, I said, I just learned about this material. I'm not sure I've ever used it.
Okay, got it.
But it was, for me, it's ease of getting materials.
Right.
So for me, a Sonique PVC board, I have no idea where I'd source that. I know where to go to Home Depot.
Okay. Biodegradable foam board. I know a lot of people that use this stuff just because it's a little bit more environmentally friendly. And then these 2 resources, I forgot about these. I'm going to look them both up. Bunch ball for gamification. And then the other one that I really want is a catch box, a soft wireless mic. All right, tell me about it. How's it work?
Oh my God, it's the greatest thing. So it's a cube that's probably like 12 by 12. And it is soft and foamy. I got in on like one of the early Indiegogo kind of, I forget how I even heard about it.
Like a Kickstarter or something?
Yeah, it was a Kickstarter. And there's a microphone inside of it. It's funny. I thought of this many times during COVID thinking, oh, this would be a no for COVID. Yeah. Imagine something that you were throwing and catching to different people across a room. But it's almost like if you were throwing a stuffed animal. and with a microphone in it. So for a lot of people, microphones are incredibly intimidating. You know, you put a microphone in their hands and they're suddenly like, you know, I'm not Sonny and Cher or whatever. Boy, that's a dated reference. So, but if you throw them a foam pink stuffed animal kind of thing, you almost feel silly, which is good because it kind of relaxes you. You feel silly talking into it, and yet it projects into the room. So it's fabulous, fabulous tool.
It's
I don't
amazing.
even know if they sell them anymore, but I have one.
Well, I mean, if you ever want to get rid of it, just send it my way. So what I love about this chapter is you know, I can just see your bookshelf on this, right? I mean, and really like going back to like the Nancy Margulis stuff and the, you know, the David Sibbitt and the you know, some of the people that really made, I think, our industry. It was really, really great to see a lot of these things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
just for the resources, this is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I wanted to be inclusive.
Yeah, let me there's a couple of questions. There was another one. Do you ever go back and erase anything during break? That one's from Radhika.
I'm super picky about mistakes I've made. So I'll go back and correct, like if I've written an A instead of an O or something, and it looks wonky on the chart, I'll go back and use a mailing label to cover that mistake and rewrite it. But I don't erase content.
Mhm.
And the other thing I've learned over time is there's a lot of times I get done with a chart, probably more often than not, where I say, oh, I really want to redo this chart, you know, make it prettier. I want to make a version 2.0. But what I have learned is you can't do that, because going back to trust, if you move the quote in orange on the bottom right corner that Jerry said,
Mhm.
they will know when they get the new version that you changed it.
Yeah.
And then it begs the question, what else did you change?
Yeah.
Or did you take something out? So sometimes I just have to, you know, it's that the Grove expression about center, draw, accept.
Center, draw, accept. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really, I go with that mantra. You know, you have to center when you step up to a chart or are facilitating a meeting. You draw or do whatever you're going to do. And then when you get done, you accept it. You can pretty it up. You know, you can add some chalk or add some color or whatever it is, but you really can't overhaul the chart, because people, you have to remember the purpose of it. It's not for the purpose of art. It's for the purpose of capturing an idea or getting a conversation out. So if you go back to that purpose, you really can't.
You know, I got to tell you, I'm a huge fan of everybody that's in this industry. Like it's almost like, you know, some people like to follow sports athletes and things. Like I follow visual practitioners, and there was this one guy who was drawing these charts. I was like, these are unbelievable, right? They're absolutely amazing, just blowing me away. I was like, how are you doing this, right?
Mhm.
And I could not imagine how during a 1 hour talk, this guy was able to do something like this. And so I called him. I said, you got to tell me, how are you doing this?
Uh-huh.
He's like, well, you know, Brian, I do the chart and then I take it home and I spend the next week redrawing it. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, and okay, so here's the thing. My first reaction was like, well, that's cheating, right? My second reaction, and it was kind of like, you know, if you break the mental model of like having it, because, you know, if you see it drawn in the room,
yes,
you're part of the making process. The mental models that wind up on the chart are your memories, right? Like they're memory anchors.
Sure.
And then I thought, well, wait a minute now, that could be something that your clients would really want, right? Something that like is pretty up and immortalized. And like now, you know, we can put it in a book or print it on a wall or have it, you know. So I had like this whole arc of, well, that's cheating to like, it's actually pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it depends. Again, you bring up a great point. What's the purpose of the chart?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I just did a meeting. We were very limited on space. I had like one wall that already was going to capture their 3 products, but then I need to capture a bunch of other stuff. So I'm putting paper where I can. So the charts, bottom line, were really ugly.
Yeah.
And when we talked afterward, you know, he was aware of that. He was totally fine with it. He knew the purpose of what we were doing. But I said, I'd really like to redraw these charts, because I'd like to put the things that were on chart 3 into chart 1. Like, let's start pulling the things together that need to be together to help move this forward. So then there's a time where there's an acceptable reason why you'd redo it, not just because of personal pride or, you know, wanting to show your prettiest chart.
Yeah, so I love the idea of what you might call a summary graphic, right?
Exactly.
Where you take everything and you like working with your clients, you say, okay,
Yes.
what's the most important messaging that's in here?
Yes.
Maybe you print up small versions and they highlight it or whatever, but then you take that and that's where you take it back. And
Yeah.
with time and study and preparation, you put together something that's really impactful.
Yes, yes. I did that once with a client. It was back in the days when I was bringing in big teams to do it like a week-long event.
Mhm.
And we spent, and it really was, I think it was Monday through either Thursday or Friday. But on Thursday, we were actually capturing at each different session what were the key points of it.
Mhm.
And then we created a summary graphic, and it was a 16-foot summary graphic
Wow.
of the event. So they got to see, like, we went from, it was kind of like, let me tell you the story of the meeting. So here's where we started, and then we did this, and then we did this, but it was all on one chart, and they loved it. They loved having the summary with the backup charts there when they wanted to drill down into what was the detail of what we did on Wednesday afternoon, for example.
Amazing. That is so cool.
Yeah.
So Carrie's got a question for us that I think would be a pretty good segue. She says, is there going to be a start meeting? Now, for full disclosure, I did not read your second book because for some reason, after we spoke, I right then I ordered it from Amazon. It still hasn't showed up yet.
Yes.
Talk the Walk. I mean, was this not good enough? You had to go and write another book. What happened?
Well, no, okay. So the Talk the Walk was number 3, and that was the book I always wanted to write. So
Okay.
the funny thing was, in writing, we've got to start meeting like this. I developed my own process for how I was going to put this together. So I took myself on a writing retreat in Tulum, Mexico.
Ooh.
And I had because of that very reaction, I'm like, ooh, I better have a structure, or I'm just going to do beach things and I'm going to come away with no book. So I had a very clear structure for myself of how I was going to run my own writing retreat. And so it came away, obviously the book got published. I had a little incentive because I had a speaking engagement that I had dangling in front of me if I finished the book by a certain deadline. So I got it done in record time, but the process was really good. I loved doing it. And so I organized a writing retreat the following year back in Tulum with a couple of people I knew who wanted to write books. So it was three of us plus me. Well, the good news was the writing process didn't just work for me, it worked for others so well that I had all this downtime. It was like running a daycare and putting them down for their nap and then having nothing to do. So I sat down and I just started. And again, like this book, I wanted to write Talk the Walk again, but I just put this book together called To Meet or Not to Meet. So this is the little book. So if you've ever heard, any of you who have any aspirations of writing a book, there's a great company in Arizona called Minibook, MINIBUK. And they do small books, which are really, really guided as kind of like a supersized business card. Let's see if I can pull one.
I think I've seen this before.
Yeah, they're
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, they're little tiny books, right?
I didn't realize that was yours. Yeah.
And so what's great about this is people are likely to throw away a business card, right? But if you give them something that has some content in it, they're less likely to throw it away. They cost about, I don't know, $2.50 each or something. So it's more expensive than a business card, but not by a whole lot. And you can put a ton of content in them. So this little book is really for those internal meetings that talk about like ways that people inside companies can actually run better meetings. And it's, like cutely coordinated. So it looks like
so cool.
A mini version. But that's when I wrote this, my computer. That's when I wrote that book, is when I was writing that or running that retreat with them. So that was another accidental book.
So tell me about Talk the Walk then, because that's the one that you've been like waiting to write. These other two are like in preparation for it.
Yes. And they have nothing to do with it, except for I had to figure out from a branding perspective, like, okay, I've got these 2 other children. Mm-hmm. I don't want to leave them on the curb, but really at the heart of it, engagement for leaders comes down to, like, we have meetings. And so meetings are a great way to engage employees. So if you're organized and you're purposeful about how you gather people, then that's a great way to create engagement. So the Talk the Walk book really puts in all the things that I've thought about, worked on, been fascinated with around employee engagement, employee experience. It talks about culture. It talks about strategy, values, vision. Sorry. and there's like several chapters on leadership, because I think I have real passion around the fact that leaders really have such an impact on the engagement of employees.
Hmm.
And, you ask, would I write another book about the START meeting? It's funny. So during COVID, I thought, oh, maybe I could write a book about, the virtual meetings and all of that. And I thought, I just do not have enough passion about this. Like, I am one of these people who is hanging out with my tech problems going, God, this gotta pass. Please let us go back to in person, because this tech thing is not my favorite way to work with people. I'm an extrovert, right? I like being in a room with real people, not 1-inch people on a screen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I
If I'm
never
being
took it on.
really honest with you, when I heard that when I like got the sense that everything was going to shift virtual and I didn't have to commute and I didn't have to like be in a room with people, I was like, yeah. It was horrible. Don't get me wrong. We suffered some
Right.
losses. We took it on the chin a little bit, but it was like, this part's nice.
Oh, God.
So, but back to the book, back to Talk the Walk. So, specifically around employee engagement and the impact that leaders have on that. So, one of the things I've been hearing a lot lately is the whole idea of quiet quitting.
Oh, yeah.
Which to me, it sounds like, well, it's just, people just kind of screwing off at work, which is, how is that new? Right. So, but what are your feelings about like quiet quitting?
Oh my gosh. It's funny because on the last plane ride, I wrote a whole bunch of words that have to do with quiet quitting. There's also called quiet firing.
Quiet firing.
And
I haven't heard that one. What's that one?
Quiet
Actually,
firing.
for the sake of like, what is quiet quitting? Because that's kind of a new one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind defining that one a little bit?
Honestly, quiet quitting is just another word for disengagement. It means the way that Gallup always defined. So there was engaged, disengaged, and actively disengaged, right? So actively disengaged is we're trying to gather people on our side to make trouble. The disengaged people have always been there. So those are the quiet quitting in the new world.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just people who put in the time that they are contracted to do and no more. So there's no sort of ambition to get ahead, or I'm going to work the 80 hours. It's just like, I'm just going to put in. I just saw your comment, Heather.
Yeah, I want to bring that in too. Heather says, sorry, I have to lovingly disagree to a certain extent. Heather, what's going on for you?
Can I talk? Sorry,
Yeah.
Dana. I don't want to take the spotlight. I love you more than my luggage. So I got to tell you. So to some, quiet quitting is about creating a boundary.
Oh, no, I was just going to get to that.
I knew you were. I knew you were. Keep going.
I think that's where it came out of, because so it is disengagement, and I'm not actually anti-disengagement. I mean, engagement means I'm going over the top and I'm always going for the next this and the next that. Disengagement is I'm putting in the work, but you're not paying me to do more. You're not guaranteeing I'm going to have a job. And I think that's one of the really great things that came out of COVID is this thing that we have talked about. My entire working life has been about work-life balance. And I think COVID forced this idea of what work-life balance could look like for people. And so I think you're exactly right, Heather. I think quiet quitting means, hey, I know you don't need me in that office to be there and doing all this extra stuff. And by the way, I have a kid and they play soccer and I'm going to be at that game. And my dog is at my heels, chewing my shoes, ready to go for a walk. Like all those things, we forced work-life balance into the conversation. And I think companies are really thrown as, we don't know how to handle this. I mean, these companies are desperately trying to reel people in. And it's really hard to make the case for why it's important to be back in the workplace. I think this is a fascinating time.
It really is, and not the only because recently a lot of the tropes have been, had the rug pulled out from under them. The idea that everybody has to be in the office, the idea that everybody has to have a commute, the idea that you have to have constant supervision, constant management, that you have to be in a place in order to get work done.
Right.
Jill shares in chat, HBR also recently defined it, quiet quitting, as the way that Heather shared, which is interesting to see different definitions from different groups.
Yeah.
So Dana, you're about to talk about quiet firing. What's that one?
Quiet firing is where bosses, and this is a new one to me, so I could get this a little off, but it's where bosses don't give Heather the opportunities that they would have given her otherwise. So it's like, I'm just going to accept that Heather is here. I can't fire her. It's too much work or whatever. So I'm just going to quietly kind of forget that she's here and give the opportunities to other people who are putting in more energy or effort or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Heather and I actually worked for twice. We worked for the same company, two different companies, and the first one that we worked for, not going to name it, they did a lot of work around what they'd call hypos, high potentials, right? And so I always had the question, well, yeah, but what about everybody else, right? I mean, they're here, they're doing their job. Just because they're not high potential, are they not getting the opportunities, you know, that others were? I mean, and what are we doing to those high potentials? Are we, you know, what are we doing to their work-life balance if we're always going back to the same people?
Right.
So
Exactly.
in the book, and again, because I don't have it with me, I'm sorry, I did not do my
I'm just
homework.
sending it to you.
I thank you, but it's on the way. I'm sure it's there. I checked. I've got a copy on the way. So you said it's mostly about it's about engagement. It's also about what leaders can do, right?
Yes.
So what can leaders do to boost engagement?
Well, they can have better meetings.
Okay.
First and foremost.
Hire facilitators.
Yeah, exactly. Recognizing when they need to. I think there's so many facets for leaders. I think leaders understanding that their journey is a lifelong journey to be learning about new things and new impacts. I was actually during COVID, early on COVID, doing leadership development, and we were talking about the importance of empathy and emotional intelligence. And I think that really came out during COVID, is that the good leaders really empathize with what their employees were going through, what their home life situations were, what their needs were, in a way that never, it was forced on them by COVID. But the true leaders really were shining, as opposed to the bad leaders who were doing things like, I can't see your work, you need to get in here. Obviously that's not good leadership. You have to have a better sense of that. So it's about lifelong learning. It's really about knowing your people, having great awareness of those things. So many, understanding the difference between leadership and management, just understanding that leaders have a different role than managers, and managing things as opposed to leading people. I don't know. I can't come up with anything else. I know I just dumped everything I knew about leadership and leadership development, and probably all my own personal beliefs into those chapters.
Well, so here's what I heard. There's emotional intelligence, empathy, focusing on the human side of things, understanding that there's a difference between management and leadership. In chat, Carrie says it starts with psychological safety and people being able to speak courageously. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
So this is the hard part, because when people get to be leaders in an organization, they got there because they were pretty good at their last job, right? And if you go all the way back, well, people are hired to do a task, right? To do a thing that can be pretty tactical and pretty, task focused, and get the job done.
Yeah.
And then, well, you were successful. So now we're going to make you a manager, and then we're going to make you a supervisor, and now we're going to make you an executive.
Right.
And I must have been doing something right before.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say, I didn't hear it was about the bottom line so much. I didn't hear that it was about getting the job done to the same extent that it could have been maybe earlier in the career, right? So how is it if you're promoting people based on their performance of the job before, right? How are you growing good leaders?
Yeah, this is the age-old question, right? Because I've been worked with many, but when I've been internal, it's engineers or scientists, and they are not. I just got off a call today with somebody. I'm building a leadership development program, and saying, people come in here because they're scientists. They're very scientifically passionate about their field, but not necessarily about managing people. And the way that you get promoted in this organization is by managing people. And that's not necessarily their skill set or their passion. And so being very careful to notice and pay attention to people who seem to have that extra skill set of being good with people is really important, rather than just, Heather's an outstanding employee. She's doing really, really well at her job, so therefore let's promote her so she's overseeing other people. Well, that may not be at all what's on Heather's mind, what's her passion, and what her skill set is. Right. Sorry to keep picking on you, Heather. You're in the middle of my screen.
Well, ever since that, fried chicken and PBR dinner, we're all friends.
Oh, yes.
True story. So what I'm hearing you say is that when you find people who have those people skills, that you look for it, right? That you go for it. Can you develop it?
I think you can develop leadership, but I also think there are people who have natural born leadership skills. So I'll use somebody that both of you have met. My daughter has been a natural leader since she was a tiny child. But I said to her more than one time, I said, I said, I said, a leader without followers is just bossy. So
Nice.
it's literally since she was a little kid, because she liked to boss her sister around. And so it's that self-awareness. So again, I love that emotional intelligence has really taken center stage in helping people to understand, like, it's not just about me, it's really about how do I influence the people around me in a positive way so that we really get the best out of everyone. It's not just about me, or it's not just about one person, but it's really about making the whole. So going back to your point, Carrie, about psychological safety, that really helps facilitate that conversation about the whole and making it not about me as a leader, but we as a group. So for example, in this organization, I'm structuring leadership development around 3 levels. So it's knowing yourself, understanding how you form and manage and facilitate a really productive team. And then it's understanding the organization. So how do I work in this bigger structure? Yeah, exactly. How
Something
did
like
you
that.
create that?
So self-awareness,
Something
working
like
with the
that.
team,
Yeah.
working with the organization culture. That's a brilliant
Exactly.
idea. Yeah.
It's like we planned this and we didn't.
It's like we planned it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And understanding for them, because I'm interviewing the very senior managers right now, understanding that their part in facilitating a healthy culture plays a great part in how you make leadership successful. So the two can't be separated. Like, you have to be aware of the culture and the culture's impact on the leaders and subsequently the rest of the employees in the organization.
Hmm.
So
let's geek out a little bit on that one, right? And I just had this conversation with somebody today who really wanted. This is a senior leader inside an organization who really, really wants to change the culture. And I said, okay, great. Why did people join this organization? And well, it provides structure. You know, we're a hierarchy. We have clear standard operating procedures. You know, we have the book on how everything gets done. Okay, fine. What do you want to do with it? Well, I want to mix things up. You know, we need to be a little bit more ad hoc. We need to be more responsive to the market. We need to be more responsive to our needs, and just really more coaching him than anything else. What he got to was, you know, maybe people join this culture because they like it. You know, that it speaks, going back to the self-team organization. If I'm the kind of guy who likes structure, likes hierarchy, right? And all of a sudden I get a leader who shows up and says, hey, guess what? You know, we're going to turn into Silicon Valley in the Wild West. That doesn't work for me, right?
right.
So the connection between personal preference and culture, right? When leaders want to make a shift in culture, how do they navigate that? Because I mean, it's really, there's a lot of inertia there.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I think, having been in an organization that very purposely changed their culture, I think it's the willingness that it's okay that Brian doesn't like this anymore. And let's help Brian get into a place, whether it's here or in another organization, where he's more comfortable. Because what you signed on for may not be where the future is. And that's okay, not making anybody wrong about that, but just accepting, you know, the quiet quitting idea, the quiet firing idea, the idea that organizations have become more fluid. And as long as you're feeling comfortable about your skill set, maybe this isn't a good fit for you. You know, where we're going is not going to be a good fit for you, but making it so it's not a shameful experience to have that conversation and that realization.
Finding a place for someone. It just might not be where they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think all of us have had to accept, like, life is fluid, and what you thought was going to be one, you know, again, the meeting that you planned versus the meeting that you have. Well, the life that you planned versus the life that you're having.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily line up. And that has to do with jobs too. You know, things change, careers are created that we never knew about. And sometimes jobs disappear that we've been in forever, or they morph into something that, if we were going to be on Zoom forever in facilitation, I'm pretty sure I would rethink my career, because I don't think that would be not the way I'd want to run my life.
All right. So here's if you were not doing what you were doing now, what would you be doing?
Art.
Tell me more. Did you paint the painting behind you?
I did paint the painting behind me,
Oh,
inspired by a friend who went to the huts over the water in Bora Bora in February. And I'm like, I'm going to paint this to bring in the juju that I get there
Yeah,
myself.
it's the second time somebody's brought up the huts over Bora Bora with me today. This is like
Really?
karma telling me I got to get there. That's
It
amazing.
might be. It might be. And the colors behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a funny story, Brian. So I didn't come into this field via art, whereas a lot of people did. But I came in through the OD arm and took up the art by force, so I learned like icons and colors and all that stuff using pan pastels and everything. So it was a long time, and Emily Shepard's a good friend of mine, and she actually did come in through art. She has a master's in fine arts, and we all have had the experience. Somebody comes up to you at a break, oh my God, you're such an amazing artist. And I would just I'm just feeling like the biggest,
I'm a fraud. Right. I know.
Total fraud. Right. And so I've had this conversation many times with Emily, and I said, oh, I hate when people say you're an artist. I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist. And she said, you are an artist. She said, think about most of the people in the room have never drawn anything in their life, let alone own a bunch of pastels and markers and stuff. So it was a couple of years ago only that I kind of, when was it? It was when I was back in California, because now I'm in Colorado for 4 years. So it's probably been about 6 years. And I thought, okay, it's been long enough. I've been hearing this word, so I'm going to just embrace this, this topic of art. So I was really intrigued with sketch notes, right? Not sketch notes like we use in our meeting, but like more urban sketching.
Right.
So when people go out and they just sketch something that they see, there's beautiful journal pages of people traveling through Florence and drawing whatever's in front of them with watercolor. So I tried that. Watercolor and I are not really great friends. Doesn't matter, by the way, how many watercolors you buy, how many brushes you buy, because I tried that method. But I couldn't manage it. I argue with my daughter. She says, oh no, watercolors are so easy. I said, no, you're absolutely wrong. They're not easy. So I gave up for a little while, and then I thought, no, I'm going to try this again. So I actually met an artist who was using acrylics. And I said, oh, this is interesting. So I took a painting class. And I took another painting class, and I loved it. And what I particularly loved is abstract art, because I had for years the pressure of like, draw an ostrich with his head in the sand. You're like,
right.
And before you had Google on your phone, you had to like pull that out of the air and put that down on paper for everybody to see and laugh. So, so I loved abstract art because I didn't have any of the pressure of that. So it was like completely free form. There were things I needed to learn, obviously, like color theory and what colors made mud and things like that. I agree with you, Rahika. That's exactly what it is, in both spaces. And so I've just been playing with that, and posting that on Instagram has been so much fun. I love having friends either comment to me directly or on Instagram about, oh my God, I love your art. That's just so flattering to me to imagine that I'm doing something that people who don't have to say nice things and aren't paying me are saying nice things. So it's very rewarding, and it's
affirming. Yeah.
It's a great outlet, and it's a great way to spend money.
And just for the recording, Radhika said, capturing the moment is what art is about. So this is certainly art.
Yes.
And Heather says, say no to being an art monkey.
What's an art monkey?
Heather, what's an art monkey?
That's when they tell you to draw something and you draw it.
Yes.
Make me a bicycle clown. Exactly.
Right.
So there's a question in there from Carrie that I want to make sure we get. Going back to the idea of culture, right? Yes. Do you believe in culture audits? And if so, are there any that you could recommend?
Yes, but I don't have any formally that I use. I really just start asking questions about what's the culture like and what's rewarded here. I actually have a template. It's not a book, but I created a kit called Meeting in a Box, and culture is one of the templates that I have in that kit. So It's really about, I feel like I have that posted somewhere, like on a website or something. It's really about asking the questions of the things that make up culture. So I have a template, like a table template that you can do that with, but it's also like interviewing questions about, what gets rewarded around here, how are decisions made, all those things that make up that elusive thing called culture.
Yeah. Carrie also says, speaking of templates, could that be your next book?
Oh, you're so funny, Carrie.
Carrie, just because you're asking, let me share one that I like to use. So this one is called the Organization Culture Assessment Indicator, the OCAI.
Ah,
And Dana, I don't know if you've come across this one, but
uh-uh.
what's really cool about it is that there's an assessment, you give it to participants, and then what they do with it is that they actually plot out their results
Oh,
across
nice.
the dimension of where they are versus where they want to be.
Nice.
And so if, for example, going back to that example that I was mentioning a second ago with that one guy who's, banging against his own culture,
Yeah.
he wanted them to be more ad hoc,
Uh-huh.
and they were firmly entrenched in, actually over here, in the hierarchy.
Oh gosh, that's a tough.
So this one's really cool. It's based on the work of Cameron and Quinn, and their book is called The Competing Values Framework. And the OCAI, the Organization Culture Assessment Indicator, appears in there. The other one that I would recommend, Dana, this is a tool that I think you know and love too, that's for culture, is to do a graphic history with folks.
True.
Because once you've got the graphic history, right,
Yes.
you can pull out from that, well, what are the values? What are the lessons that we had?
Yes.
Who are the people that made an impact?
Yes.
And I think that's sort of it's kind of how would you describe it? I like to think of it as a sort of a way of getting around and pulling out what the culture is.
Yes, that's really a great point. It's such an undervalued yet so valuable tool to use with groups. I've never thought about it as a culture tool, but you're absolutely right. It's a fun way to get at it. And it's so honoring of the people who have been there a long time, who are often discounted because they get to tell the old stories. And the newer people get to say, oh, but how did, it's really like, feels like the seniors telling the little kids about, the old days and how things worked.
My favorite story that a graphic history surfaced was how, like 25 years ago in this one organization, these wild turkeys attacked like the CEO's car, and nobody liked the CEO. Like they just came out of nowhere and like attacked this car.
Wow.
And people are like, that didn't happen. They're like, oh yeah, it happened. Yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
my
This happened.
gosh. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I did a graphic history of Dove chocolate. They were celebrating
wow.
their 25th or 50th anniversary. I can't remember. Anthony and I went up there, put this big piece of paper. We were there for 2 or 3 days, but we had to be there on shifts. So we got because they were 24 hours. So we'd go home and we'd sleep from 2 to 5 or something. And we'd come back to get the night shift and stuff. And they had different people walking by the chart and giving us stories about different things that had happened over time. And so there was a fire that had happened. So Anthony drew this incredible fire. They talked about the women who used to, and it was women who were on the line, and they were like quarter-pound ice cream bars. And there was no automation yet. So they'd hold 2 at a time. So you can imagine Anthony drew these beautiful pieces of ice cream, and they would literally do this all day long. Talk about repetitive stress disorder.
Oh, gosh.
That's how they dipped the ice cream. It was a quarter-pound each.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, but it was incredible.
I hear about these other, I wind up with like engineers and scientists and things. Other people get to go into like Dove chocolate and Mars candy. And, I always get I want to do the candy ones.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up a little bit just to the participants to see if they've got any questions for you. Before I do that, Dana, so big takeaways. What is it that you'd like people to walk away with regards to Talk the Walk? What's the big takeaway from that?
The big takeaway is, really, it's a resource book for so many things. It's about culture. It's about all sorts of things regarding leadership. It's about employee experience and what are the different components that flood into that. What I was saying at the beginning, Brian, is I had the idea for that book for 13 years. I have literally a bin of resource materials that went into making that book that I've kept. I don't know why. It's in my basement now, but I have not had a moment where I've thought, oh shoot, I should have put that in there. I've had those moments, but it's always in there. So it's really, really a compendium of really amazing resources. And I'm not just saying this because I wrote it, but it really is a great resource book for so many things that are kind of like the Start Meeting Like This is for events. That is for leadership and organizations.
Love it.
That want to do change. Yeah. And
can't wait to read it.
Yeah. Someday you should get it. I want to just throw in this other really odd thing. So this just came up in the last month. For those of you who facilitate, this is not my voice. This is a really strange contortion of my voice. I have actually damaged my vocal cords facilitating. So, all those times when you say, hey, everybody come back into the room. Well, I don't think I had a strong enough voice to do that to begin with. And now I may have permanently damaged my vocal cords. So I had a talk with Nevada last week, and we're exactly 10 years apart. And I said, hey, so let me tell you what's coming up for you.
Dana, I'm so sorry to hear that. Are you?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to a doctor to hopefully have him tell me that I'm wrong about this. But this has been going on for over 2 months, where I have this kind of raspy, to me more kind of voice. So my point is, was a lot of talk for a while about taking care of your body when you're doing this work, and making sure that you're stretching and taking care of your back and grabbing a chair if you need. But it had never occurred to me that you could do any damage to your voice from doing this work. So just a caution, like from now on, I'm going to carry chimes. I'm not going to try to gather the group with my own voice, because I don't think I can do it honestly now.
Yeah. Wow. I had no idea. That's a really good
Hey.
piece of awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to open it up to others. And the way that we can do this is, if you've got a question, a comment for Dana, just feel free to go ahead and go off mute. We'll see it, and then we'll call on you. But let's bring some other people into the conversation. What questions or comments do you have for Dana? Asking about organizational development, engagement, her life as a graphic facilitator and a graphic recorder. Anything you're coming up with. And by the way, if you've been sketchnoting, Nancy, if you've been sketchnoting, we would love to see your sketch notes before we go.
And that's an Anne Lamott thing, Heather. Anne Lamott is all about don't edit and write at the same time.
Well, it was words I needed to hear right away. So
good.
I just have to ask, because I know that you had been, I don't know how much of the history we talked about in this conversation, and I'm not trying to date you, please don't hate me for this. But when I was reading your first, when I was reading your first book, and I was literally poring over it, I was a graphic recorder at the time, but I said, if I ever become a graphic facilitator, this is my go-to book. And then as soon as I became a graphic facilitator, it was my go-to book. It got me through so many things, and I kept reading it thinking, this makes so much sense. How did you know? Was it just experience? Can you talk about some of the giants that you stood on the shoulders of, or?
Oh gosh. I mean, yes, it was a lot of experience. It was a lot of watching others and just paying a lot of attention. I mean, when I got into this field, there was no Facebook, so we are dating myself. David Sibbett was really the only one that was kind of known for doing graphic facilitation. I just was talking with Bobby at the Grove and talking about, I met them when they were way back, not in the Presidio. I took my first classes in downtown San Francisco and in South of Market. So, David was a big mentor. Gordon Rudo was a big mentor early on. I met some amazing people just by geography. I happen to be in the Bay Area. So I met Emily when she came into the field. Anthony did an informational interview before he came into the field. I did an informational interview with Lynn Carruthers. So it's funny because I often say, I was in this field before a lot of these people. I feel like I should be better at this than I am.
I think you're excellent at it. And I think the way that you were able to put it into words for the rest of us to learn from is just brilliant.
Good. That really makes me feel good. I know in 2015, I think that was Lynn Carruthers' IFVP event in Austin. And she said, your book is what I relied on to put this conference together. And you have no idea. Like, I had no idea when I put that book together what an impact it was going to have. So it's so great to hear. It's one, kind of timeless, and two, that it had the widespread impact that it did.
It was just in time learning for me. So thank you.
Good.
Thanks for sharing that. Others, anything else you'd like to ask Dana? And while people are coming off mute, Dana, I'm wondering if over your right shoulder, if that little silver box there, is that your card deck?
Yes, that's my card.
You want to show that off? I love that
I'll
thing.
show it off. Although I have to say, this is not one of my successes. This is something that I came up with because I thought, on the heels of these books, I want to put out some things that are useful as tools. What I learned about it, not that this is a bad deck, is that I have no idea how to market. So what I did for everybody's knowledge is I put 3 sets of cards in here. So there are templates. So there's all sorts of templates of everything I could think of that I'd ever seen. So for example, there's a SWOT analysis. I'm doing a terrible job with the camera.
It looks great.
SWOT analysis. The RACI model is on some of the templates, a bunch of things like that. And where these came from is the Grove had a deck early on of their first set of templates, their strategic visioning templates. And I had used those so many times to design meetings with people. And it was moving those cards around and helping people to figure out like this comes first and then we'll do this, blah, blah, blah. So having these cards, as well as I did a set of models. So really common models, like for example, urgent versus important was one model. And a bunch more. And so these were all meant to be meeting design templates and cards. And then there was well, there still is a flash drive card. So if you wanted to print those off, you could print them off and make your own templates that were already designed for you. And then the third pack of things is probably everybody's seen Visual Explorer. I was actually in on the beta testing of Visual Explorer. So those are those visual pictures, but this was a deck that I made of pictures, all photos that I took myself over a period of like 10 years. And so each one, it's 200 cards that each have a different picture. And I still use these to this day. And on the reverse side are quotes. So for example, a successful man is one who can lay a firm foundation with the bricks others have thrown at him. So sometimes I'll play with the quotes, sometimes I play with the pictures, but it's such a fun tool to use with groups, both in designing and also in facilitating meetings. So, but again, I learned that I am not a marketer because I have a basement full of these boxes because I just never figured out like who is my audience to target this to? And I even explored putting them on Amazon and just never followed through with it.
I mean, it's people that love, I'll just say this, that love tools, modalities, methods for facilitation. By the way, I was looking for, so here are the, I hate to say it, but it's like the current version of the Grove strategic visioning cards, these cards. I was actually looking for, Dana, you might remember the old ones, which had the pine cone on it, if you remember that. Yeah. So I have a set of those. I couldn't find them. I was looking around for them.
Yeah.
So can I just say this? You really inspired me. Let me just show you what I've got here. So this is like a shoebox I made for myself. And each one of these is its own, since we were talking about Grove stuff, just as a quick reference,
Yes, exactly.
And for me, it was the act of putting all of these things together, right? That really, it's like, okay, now I know 3 chords. Now I using these to design these with to design an agenda with a client. I still think it's a fantastic model for agenda design, for knowledge management, just to have things on cards.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it is really fun. It is available to buy, Rahika. Can we send out the link afterwards?
Sure, we can do that. We can drop it into the show notes, the meetup comments.
Great. Because I'm not technically competent, so I can't possibly find that too.
Yeah.
But what was really fun is pulling together it's kind of like you did, pulling together all the templates that you knew,
right?
Getting them designed in a way that other people could use them, as well as, chasing down the models. That was really fun.
That is the fun part. So I got to show you, I'm currently, this is version 2.0. I'm working on this one. And this is originally intended to hold either cards from Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, because it's got like this nice kind of thing that you can like lay out. Yeah, it's very, very swanky.
Oh, right? Sparkly.
So let's see. It looks like, again, a couple of people are asking if they can actually buy that. So you may have got, who knows, maybe you can sell a couple of those.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Again, I want to make a final offer. Anybody want to get in on this conversation? Feel free to go ahead and go off mute. If not, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Dana, thank you so much for your time and being here. Hang around a little bit for the after party. Carrie, what's coming up for you? Got an idea?
Well, I have to say, I absolutely loved your book, and it is my guiding model for our organization. I use it every day. I've used the hand trick, drawing the hands piece in my facilitations. It's so awesome. And thank you for being so inspirational. I'm just wondering why you don't train others. Why do you only consult and that kind of stuff? Like, would you ever consider training, coaching others and doing this stuff?
Yeah, I did train for a long time. I trained mostly internally. So if I had to train facilitators who were going to be facing templates for the first time to get them over the fear of like listening and writing and giving them some tips on that. I just feel like there's a lot of people who do the training better than I do. Nevada Lane has such a great workshop. Back earlier than that, Emily was doing a workshop. So I just felt like there's a lot of people in that space doing the training. So it's probably not something that I need to duplicate. So I don't know.
Dana, you have a standing offer if you want to use Nova Scribes for a place to pilot a training, virtual, in person, or otherwise.
I love virtual.
standing offer to do that if you like. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Well, so let's give Dana a big Nova Scribes. Thank you.
Wait, one more question.
Oh, one more. Go ahead.
Question. Yeah. Don't just wait. I just wanted to ask you too about your employee experience design piece and developing this holistic view. I'm just looking at your website and you've got employee design experience, developing a holistic view of employee life cycle to drive culture impact that lasts. Can you tell me just a little bit more about that? Because I know, like I say, I use this all the time in designing our own in-house experiences, but just can you go into a little bit more detail around that?
Yeah, well, it's so funny. So the employee experience came out of work I was doing at Mars at the time. So this was early on when employee engagement was kind of a new term. So as I said, this book was cooking in my brain for 13 years, right? So, and people weren't even talking about employee experience. They were really only talking about employee engagement as it related to these surveys that were happening, that companies were paying like thousands and thousands of dollars for. And what would happen, and in the case of Mars, they would do the survey, the results would come back, managers who had low scores would get severely chastised, and then the year would go by and they'd run another survey. And nobody had cracked the code on like, obviously, if a manager knew how to do something different, they'd do it, right? They're not evil. And so nobody, including Gallup, for example, had not cracked the code on like, what's the next conversation from doing the survey and giving the results that actually will impact behavior. And so my Mars colleagues literally said the words, who would be crazy enough to take this on with us? And they thought of me. I'm taking that as a great compliment. But I came up with a process that we just kept refining. The very first time we came in with blank paper, and eventually it evolved into a series of templates. But it was really getting employees together to say, hey, what's going on here? Because what doesn't happen with a survey is that you're asking, in Gallup's format, they ask 12 questions that they swear to God are the most important drivers of employee engagement. Yeah, well, that's nice. But if the question that I have on my mind as an employee isn't on those 12, then you've missed me. And that was what was happening over and over. So again, thousands of dollars they were spending on that. And so we went in and we asked the next questions, like what's really happening? What's happening in the work environment? What's happening with your managers? What's happening with recognition? The key things that really drive employee engagement are in these behaviors. And then we created a process where we had conversations with employees to look at all the results, because we talked to all the employees. We brought a smaller group together and said, here are all the results from you and your colleagues. What do you think are the biggest driving things that are impacting engagement? And then separately, we ran leaders through a group where they got to look at the results, but we said, no, you don't need to focus on the overall kind of organizational issues. What do you guys need to do as leaders to make things different? And I write about it in the book that Brian someday will get, but they actually worked in parallel with a team of facilitators that I would train up. In the employee group, they would come up with what were the actions that they needed to take culturally to make changes that would improve engagement, while leaders would work separately in another room on what are the things that we need to do as leaders to change things. And then they would come together and they would present to each other what they'd come up with. We'd always have the employee group present first, because we're thinking about engagement all the way through this process. You know, it was a second line layer of what we were talking about. So giving the employees the first voice often doesn't happen, right? It's usually the leaders who get to have the first voice. And in this case, the employees had the first voice, even down to when we had lunch, we always let the employees go first and the leaders had lunch second, which never happens in an organization, right? It's always the leaders who get, it's the employees get the scraps. So we flipped the page on all of those things. And what happened is we created these conversations where each got to understand the other's point of view and created actions that they would work on together. And it also created amazing camaraderie in the employees themselves to working together. So, I mean, the groups that we'd have in these smaller 20 people action planning groups came from all over the organization, right? So they didn't necessarily know each other, trust each other, but through these conversations, they built that. And I'll never forget, and I write about it in the book, one session we did in an organization back in, this is all from ours. So it was a fish care group. And this guy stood up, and I think he stood up, he had volunteered to present this one part of the agenda. And because they talk through like, what do we do today, right? And they share that with each other. He stood up, and then suddenly I think he got deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, these are the leaders of our organization and my peers, and I'm standing up. What the heck am I doing, right? And he literally froze. And it was the most amazing thing to watch his peer group who had worked with him all day. They literally leaned in and they said, you got this, Brian, you got this, you can do this. And I swear to God, he grew 12 inches and he suddenly started talking and you couldn't get him to stop. And it was like that moment of this is going to work, because they are so engaged in making changes and really working together. So anyway, much longer answer to what you were saying, what you were asking about, but
no, it was fantastic, because this is the kind of stuff that I'm really passionate about, and why your book, and I can't wait till your other one comes. I'm like, Brian, I'm still waiting for it. But
you're waiting too. What's going on, Amazon?
Yeah. But just curious, so like, does that kind of approach work with toxic environments? So how do you, when you're going through that process and you got people that, you know, are really entrenched in all the negative stuff and all the looking over their shoulder instead of moving forward, like, what are some of the tactics you've used to get that, so that you can get to the point where we're working together?
Yeah, actually, that was the very first engagement we had. Was a lot of that toxic culture, a lot of like people who were really angry. I mean, you talk about the actively disengaged. We had a room full of them, very unhappy people. And it was a 2-day process that we had. Again, you know, this is when we were working with blank paper. We didn't have templates yet, but we literally said at the end of day 1, hey, look, we're here to help. But if you guys don't think this is worth your time and you don't think that anything's going to change, then by all means, go back to work tomorrow and don't come here, because, you know, we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste our time. So it was very risky, right?
Yeah.
We got in the next morning, and we're out in the woods, by the way, in Tennessee. So we're in this like kind of strange little environment. We're sitting there going, and this is a rough bunch. And we're thinking, oh God, what's going to happen today? First of all, is anybody going to show up? We gave them a full invitation that they didn't have to come. And slowly but surely, they trickled in one by one. Literally everybody showed up. They had some sort of medical injection or lobotomy, but they all came in with a completely different attitude of, we want to change things and this is our best chance. So again, it was another one of those examples of, if you give people the opportunity to feel heard and listened to, they often will step up to what it is you're expecting. And it was a really, really powerful experience. I mean, these experiences have given me so much more hope in, like, when people talk about little things that are really kind of insignificant, I think, oh, this is nothing compared to what I've heard. You know, I've heard about like horrible racial incidents when we did work in Mississippi, and like some crazy stories, you know, sexual harassment like you've never heard before. But all of them, this process really moved them forward, moved the needle in terms of how they worked with each other and talked to each other. I'm not going to say we fixed all the racial injustice. That would be a crazy comment to make about Mississippi.
I think we could have a, go ahead,
Yeah.
Carrie, I'm sorry.
Oh, just thank you for that. And I appreciate you're taking the time to answer my questions. I have a million of them. So next,
Send
I hope you
over.
come back so we can
Aw.
spend more time with you and ask you, go a deeper dive. And I really hope you consider running a master class, because you do have a fan base, and you did just know you've impacted people with your book. And I
Oh,
think that's
thank you.
important for you to know, because it's you got a group of people there obviously that you've impacted. So just wanted to share that with you, as thank you for impacting me in a positive way. And I hope you keep writing, because it's been good. And I don't want to leave Brian out too, because I have yours as well. Yeah.
Totally.
That one's okay.
No, fabulous. It intimidated me. I said, what was I ever doing writing?
Yeah.
That one was okay. So let's, with that, let's go ahead and give Dana a big Nova Scribes. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but stick around for the after party.
Woohoo.